Great. And I'm going to go ahead and welcome Theresa, who's our speaker tonight. And before we get started, just everyone, please make sure that you've muted you've put yourself on mute, just in case you have some background noise. So our speaker tonight is Theresa Martin, and she comes to us all the way from Williamsburg, Kentucky. She's a Cornell University master beekeeper, an author, and the founder of the Little Wolf Nature Preserve. I went ahead and checked out the Instagram for the Little Wolf Nature Preserve. It's a great little thing to check out if you're on Instagram. With over 6 years of experiencing managing 20 to 25 colonies, Theresa has achieved high survival rates and strong production by following the model of how bees survive in the wild, employing integrated pest management and providing high support yet low intervention. Theresa serves as the president of the Whitley County Beekeepers Association and sits on the board of directors for the Kentucky State Beekeepers Association. She previously worked in IT and operations management at Fidelity Investments and Procter Gamble. And she is a great resource. So we are really lucky to have her here tonight. And with that, I'll turn it over to you, Theresa.
Thank you very much for having me. That's a very nice introduction. I really appreciate that. I do want to let folks know that despite those pretty good results, and most beekeepers might think those are pretty good results, I want you all to know that I am far from a perfect beekeeper. I make lots of mistakes. I never feel like I have this all figured out. I'm constantly learning. And my bees are nothing special. They have no special genetics that I'm aware of. They're all caught swarms. But other than that, there's nothing special about my bees. And my locations are far from perfect. Despite what might appear to be some idyllic locations, they have some really intractable disadvantages. All the locations I keep my bees, my 20 to 25 colonies in 4 different locations, and they have huge disadvantages. And I don't talk about the disadvantages very often because I really want to just highlight the good parts and maximize those. But I'm not perfect. My bees aren't perfect. My locations aren't perfect. So the survival and the pretty good production of bees and honey is likely due to the methods that I use. And so that's why I come to you today humbly to share with you how I keep bees, the science that underpins why I keep bees the way that I do, in the event that there's something in this of value to you. I want to also start by telling you that my way of keeping bees is not the one right way. It's not going to be your way of keeping bees. So I'll just share with you, this is how I keep bees, with the hope that there will be something of value in it for you. So this presentation is a summary, and a very quick summary of this Dead Bees Don't Make Honey, 10 Tips for Healthy, Productive Bees. And we're going to go ahead and get moving in this. And let's see, my keyboard wants to not move there we go. All right, so we're going to start with a question. Which beekeeper will make more honey? So we've got Betty. She goes into winter with these 10 colonies, and she comes out of winter with these 5 that died. And let me make this a little smaller here. There we go. All right, these 5 died right here. And so she has 50% survival, and she replaces these 5 dead colonies with maybe 5 nukes, we'll call it. And then we have Bob, who also goes into winter with 10 colonies, but Bob comes out of spring with 100% survival, so they all survived. So the question is, which beekeeper will make more honey? And it's pretty obvious. Most people say that Bob will make more honey because we intrinsically know that these colonies right here, well, these certainly aren't going to make any honey because they're dead, but these colonies are probably not going to make any honey either their first year, or if they are, not as much as these second year overwintered colonies. So the following summer, most people would understand that Bob is going to make more honey. We understand this, but we don't focus on it that often, and it's really critical to honey production and also the production of bees. So you might say, well, this 50% that Betty got, that's not realistic, and this 100% that Bob got, that's not realistic either. But in fact, they're both very much possibilities. And if we look at the colony loss survey that we were just talking about before the call got started, the Auburn University and the Apiary Inspectors of America and also Oregon State University have partnered to pick up where BIP left off with this survey that's been going on, this national survey that shows U.S. colony losses in this past calendar year, 2023-2024, was actually 55% of all managed colonies were lost. That died in the U.S. And this trend is getting worse over time. Now, I looked up as we were just talking about, the survey that Dr. Dewey Caron and others in Oregon have been doing for about 15 years. Oregon, your losses were only 20%, so far better than the national average. And it even showed the Portland urban beekeepers, you only lost 15% in this same time frame. So you're clearly doing better. And by the way, your trend seems to be going in the opposite direction, at least what I saw. So this is great news for all of you. And I always talk about, when I share this graph, that these losses, especially this 55%, that this is waste. This is not cows. These losses are not cows going off to market to become hamburger or something of value, but these are just truly just losses and are not wanted, and it's wasteful and nothing that any beekeeper that I know of is going to be pleased about. So that's the losses situation. And then we know already, and we talk about this all the time, why this is happening. And there's lots of different stresses. We talk about it all the time. Monocrop pollination, coarse varroa destructor, viruses, etc. But Judy Wu Smart, I got to give her credit. This is her graphic. She put on here improper beekeeping practices. And I feel so strongly that I am at least a stressor to my bees. That's me. That's my red arrow. So I put my face right on there. And I'm going to show you how I feel like I stress my bees and how I'm trying to stress them less. Because these factors, including me right here, these are cumulative stressors and they're sublethal until they're not. And then, of course, the colony collapses and it dies. Well, so you might say, well, that's all doom and gloom. I don't know why we brought this girl on here to talk. Maybe, she got anything good to say. And the answer is yes, there is good news. It turns out there's at least 3 different scientific studies that show that wild colonies, only 20% die each year versus that 48%. I have to update this statistic. This is actually 55% of managed colonies die each year. So only 20% of wild die, while 48% of managed colonies die each year. And that's a huge gap, right? That's a 30% gap right there. And some of you right now are saying in your heads, well, wait a minute. Are you saying that wild colonies are surviving better than managed colonies? And the answer is yes. That is what the scientific results show us, is that wild colonies survive better despite all the work that we put into trying to keep our colonies alive and healthy. Well, a lot of the research that culminates, that shows us how wild colonies are surviving better, is in the lives of bees. Dr. Thomas Seeley, who I know you've had come and speak at various sessions there in Oregon, and the Portland urban beekeepers. And then, of course, there's my book, which is my application of his science, of which he wrote the foreword for my book. So I'm going to share with you in this presentation a little bit of how wild bees are surviving better. We're going to analyze conventional beekeeping methods just a little bit, and then I'll give you some alternatives to increase bee health and productivity. And my only goal here, my only commitment to you, is that you come away with one idea to apply to your beekeeping. And the way we're going to go about this is I'm going to share these 10 tips really fast. And we're going to hit on this structure, every single one. I'm going to hit on the bee biology because that always starts with bee biology. Then I'll hit on very briefly the conventional beekeeping methods we were taught, the practices to increase bee health, and then my personal implementation, which, as I said earlier, will not be your personal implementation. So before we get started, now is usually a good time to stop and see if there are any questions so far.
Nothing in the chat so far.
All right. We will march into number one. All right. So the first tip number one is acquire local bees. This one's not very controversial. There is a lot of science that shows from a bee biology perspective that bees are adapted to not only their local, we say that beekeeping is local, but bees are adapted to their microclimates and their environments, and that overwintered local bees have a proven track record of survival. And this is what the consensus science shows. There's a few outlying studies that say otherwise, but the bulk of the science backs this up, that local bees have a survival track record that is better than non-local bees. Conventional beekeeping, we were taught, especially in Kentucky, to buy our queens, packages, and nukes from the south, and we ship them up north. They come all the way, for us, they come from California, they come from Florida and Georgia. For you, maybe they would come from California. But we tend to buy our queens, packages, and nukes from the south because they're not available in the northern regions early in the spring. So we buy them from the south where they can produce them down south. The practice to increase bee health and productivity is to set out swarm traps and bait hives. That doesn't guarantee you're going to get local bees, but it's your best shot at it. You can certainly buy local bees when possible, and you can, of course, split your own strong colonies, especially if they're multiple years overwintered. My personal implementation is all my bees are caught swarms, as I mentioned earlier, except my very first colony, which is now 7 years old, 6.5 years old, so it's local by now. I have never once purchased a queen. I was gifted 2 queens in my time as a beekeeper, but I've never purchased a queen. And I resolve queenlessness by allowing my bees to rear their own queen. I donate a frame of eggs and young larvae so that they can rear their own queen, or I combine a queenless colony with a small queen right swarm that I've kept that has the genetics that I want. So that's how I have implemented it. This is one of my swarm traps here, this tree, and you can see there's a pulley up here, but this trap exact box in this tree catches swarms every year, which they're possibly locally adapted bees. So that's tip number 1, pretty easy. Tip number 2 is allow and enable your bees to create a propolis envelope and lay down more propolis. So I have a whole hour on propolis. I get super excited when I talk about this stuff. It's antibacterial, antimicrobial, antiviral. It sounds like almost like snake oil, like you're selling something that it's not, but it really is this stuff. Bees use it for 2 main purposes. One is to coat the entire interior of their tree cavity because it's not only increases their immunity and resistance to pathogens, but it also is basically a weatherizing material. It's kind of like caulk that we use in our house. They close down entrances with it so that they don't have to defend openings that are too large. And it takes an enormous amount of energy for bees to collect tree resin, which they turn into, of course, propolis. Conventional beekeeping, we were probably all taught that this sticky stuff is just a nuisance, and we were taught to scrape it off when we see it and throw it on the ground. And all that does is cause our bees to go back out and get it again and again. As many times as we scrape it off, they're going to just put it right back. And that is a huge waste of time, and we're reducing their immunity when we do so. So the practice to increase bee health is, of course, don't scrape that stuff off. And we can also roughen up the inside of our hive bodies. And I have the resource, I have 3 or 4 pages of peer-reviewed science at the end of this presentation. But there's 3 different methods to roughen up the inside of the hive body. I use a knot hole or a wire brush or sometimes both. And no matter what box I'm giving the bees, if it's a deep, a medium, a super, doesn't matter. Doesn't matter, brood box, honey super, doesn't matter. If it's a box and I'm giving it to the bees, before I give it to them, I roughen up the inside. And I select on purpose for bees that are heavy propolizers. And you can see, this is one of them that I roughened up. You can see right here where I'm pointing my mouse. This is where I missed roughening up. And you can see they didn't cover it in propolis. And here they're putting down a nice propolis, making themselves a propolis envelope. This is not as good as a bee tree. I'm not pretending it is, but it's better than a smooth surface. And it allows them to deposit as much propolis as they can to fill in these cracks in the that I've made, and the rough. Oh, and you can also use rough cut lumber. All right, but moving right along. That's number 2. Number 3 is space your hives as far apart as your property will allow. And the bee biology on this one's cool too. I have a whole hour on this one. This one's so interesting. So bees in the wild, when they're choosing their own home, so whether that's a swarm out of one of our hives or out of a bee tree, when they're picking a home, Tom Seeley's The Honeybee Democracy, great book, explains. And there are, I think it's 7 studies worldwide, not even just in the U.S., that shows the density is 1 colony when they're picking per 250 acres. And the distance between those colonies is around 2,500 feet apart. Bees do this because bees know social distancing. It reduces drift, robbing, and this really bad thing called horizontal pathogen transmission. Reduces competition for forage. And when those queens are returning from a mating flight, if the colonies are spread out, she has no chance of entering the wrong hive when her hive, that virgin queen is returning from her mating flight as a mated queen. She has no chance of going in the wrong hive because it's super far apart. All right, so that's how bees do it in nature, bee biology. We were all taught to put our hives like this. They're all white, they're all facing the same direction, and they're super close together. One research study showed up to 40% of foragers enter the wrong hive, and they carry whatever infectious diseases, they carry mites, they carry whatever with them. And this creates this thing called horizontal pathogen transmission, which favors more virulent pathogens and diseases. This is what we were taught. So the practice to increase bee health is you can do 3 things. First is space your hives as far apart as you can. There's a study that shows even 100 feet on opposite corners of a suburban yard is beneficial. We can paint them different colors. We can face the entrances in different directions, like you see here. All right, my personal implementation is my 20 to 25 colonies are in 4 locations with as low density as I can do and spaced far apart. Diseases are isolated to a single colony. This is a colony that had chronic bee paralysis virus that I told you about. My queenless situations are far lower than what is recognized as normal. I've had only 7 queenless colonies in 6 years. It's not because I've got anything special going on. It's because of probably, at least in part, due to colony spacing. This is one of my suburban locations. You can see this is the homeowner's yard, and she's got a fence here. Here's one colony, and here's my other colony. It's about 100 feet. And people ask all the time, what's this hive stand here? It's not a place to put another colony. It's a place for me to sit, to observe the entrance. And I also use it as a table when I am doing an inspection so I don't have to lift heavy boxes off the ground. All right, that's number 3. Let's do number 4, and then we'll stop and I'll ask for some questions. So number 4 is don't overly disrupt the brood nest. Don't overly disrupt. That's kind of the key word here. So the bee biology is bees got their home perfectly designed. It's perfect. It's energetically efficient. It is thermodynamically perfect. The nest is rarely disturbed. They've got their resources exactly where they need them, where it takes the least amount of energy to access them, to raise brood, etc. It's perfectly designed for their needs. Over, I think it's 60 million years, they know how to make their own home, and they're really good at it. Conventional beekeeping, we were taught to disturb the nest quite a bit. So we reverse brood boxes in the spring. A lot of beekeepers are taught that. We might rearrange frames to encourage wax building on the side of the box where they might not have started yet. We might checkerboard filled and unfilled drawn comb. And here's an example I want to show you of early spring in the reverse the brood box situation. Oftentimes the brood nest is up top here. for two reasons. One is because that could be where the food is, but the other reason that is often the case is this is where it's warmer. Heat rises, you got a cold entrance down here. This is where it's the most warm, and we need to remember that when the bees are raising brood, they must hold that brood and thermoregulate it, which means hold it at that temperature no matter what's going on outside at a 95 degrees, almost perfect, just a couple degrees either side of 95, and that brood will die or will not emerge correctly. That's why they've got it up here. When we reverse boxes in early spring, and I don't know about you, but in Kentucky, we get crazy spikes up and down all the time. It was like 65 degrees the other day. It's supposed to be a high of 32 in a couple of days, really pretty cold for February. When we reverse boxes, we're moving that brood nest down where it's colder. And the heat's still up here. Now the brood's down here, and they still have to hold it at 95 degrees no matter what. And that's how we make it harder for them. They will move down when they're good and ready and when temperatures allow and when it is optimal. All right, so the practice to increase bee health is don't reverse boxes, and then just replace the frames as the bees had it. Trust that they will get to the other side of the box to draw comb when it is energetically efficient to do so. So that is the practice to increase bee health. My personal implementation, which again may or may not be how you might choose to implement this one or not, but I never rearrange frames. I don't rearrange boxes. And I also have this Broodminder T2SM temperature sensor in all my colonies. And this helps me understand what's going in and helps me to be more efficient when I'm doing inspections to disturb the brood nest less. It also helps me understand what's going on in the colony so I know what to expect when I do an inspection. All right, I'm going to stop and see if there are any questions. We're on tip number 4.
I do have a couple questions from Ted. First one is, what is a local bee? Is that Grants Pass, Olympia, Washington? And his other question, who do you ask when you want to ask someone to allow you to put a hive on their land?
Okay.
And from Susie, do you ever use slatted racks?
Okay, I'm writing these down and slatted racks. Okay. All right. So local bees, there's a lot of different definitions. What I would say is if the climate is similar to yours, I don't know about the names of the places that you mentioned, but if one of those locations is on another side of a mountain and you're on the other side, then that's probably not local. Or if it's a much higher elevation than you, or it has different floral resources, it's probably not local. So for me, maybe I can say it this way for the gentleman asking the question. If it's anywhere within like a 200-mile radius of me, it's probably considered local. The closer, the better. But what I will say is if it's in Southern California, that's not local to you. That much we can say for sure. So the closer, the better. And I will say this may be helpful to you is if you are acquiring bees from someone that you believe to be local and they're local, make sure the bees that they're selling you are also local. So sometimes we have suppliers in Kentucky who are local, but they're shipping their bees up from somewhere not local. So that's the question to ask. And the question you could ask your supplier is, where did these bees overwinter the last couple of years? Did they overwinter with you, or were they somewhere else and you've brought them in? I would ask that question and see what you get. So that's how I would answer that one. As far as asking people to put bees on their land, the way I tend to do it is I start with people I know. So the suburban yard that you saw is my friend Laura Sell. And I met her, and she had some children and she wanted to teach them beekeeping. And so we ended up striking up this opportunity for me to put bees on her property and her children to learn about bees. And that's how I did it. Family and friends, neighbors, those are some folks to start with. And then, if you see some really nice looking farm somewhere along the way or some property that you want to put bees on, people love the whole idea of bees. I don't know about your personality, but I would not be afraid to very kindly knock on their door, with my little business card that says I'm a beekeeper, and ask them if they would be interested in having bees on their property. People love the idea of helping pollinators and bees, and you can always offer them honey, a couple jars of honey, etc. So I don't know. I mean, that's how I would think about it. People are far more accommodating than maybe what we might think if we just ask. Slatted racks, yes. On this picture right here, this blue, this is the bottom board here. This is a slatted rack, and I have slatted racks on all my colonies. I'll be honest, I do not know for sure. There's not any real science that says they are significantly advantageous. Rusty Burlew is somebody, she writes for the Honeybee Suite, and she had some good posts on some of the advantages. If you look her up, she'll talk about, just Google Rusty Burlew, Honeybee Suite, slatted racks. And I just like the concept of them. I like moving the queen a little bit away from down, so close to this entrance. I like them. I think it reduces some bearding. But I wouldn't say there's any science to support my anecdotal opinion. It's just my opinion. Okay. All right, let's keep moving then. That was 3 good questions. Thank you so much for that. All right. Number 5, I think I'm going to mostly skip over, folks. You see that caution right at the top, do not employ in urban or Africanized areas. And as I understand, Portland urban beekeepers, you're probably largely urban beekeepers. This is letting your bees swarm or not discouraging swarming is not likely something I would think most urban beekeepers are going to entertain. What I will say is there is a lot of really good biology on the benefits of swarming from a biology perspective and from a health perspective. And you can see the things listed here. This one I will comment on. There's new research just came out in 2023 that shows that eggs laid in swarm cells are larger and destined to be a queen, larger than those that are laid in a worker cell. And not only that, but the queen fitness is significantly improved from swarm cells. Bees have been swarming. It is colony reproduction, and it's a biological requirement that they swarm, and they do it near perfectly. And for lots of really important advantages, we are taught very significantly and regularly how to prevent swarming. If you are a new beekeeper and you don't know these methods, you definitely want to learn how to prevent swarming. Every beekeeper should learn these things, but still recognize the swarming benefits and how they are different from splits. Swarms and splits are not the same from a biology perspective. They're actually significantly different. We can also just put up bait hives and try and catch swarms, etc. My personal implementation, I am not an urban beekeeper. Even in the suburbs, I can do this. I don't practice swarm prevention, and I catch a lot of swarms. I caught 18 in spring. I love catching swarms. It's one of my favorite activities in beekeeping. And my honey harvest, despite allowing my bees to swarm, is 2 times more than the Kentucky average, probably due to the health benefits related to swarming. So that's swarming. We'll move on. And again, very serious warning. If you are in an urban or Africanized area, this is strongly discouraged. If you're not, and even if you are, it's still helpful to understand the benefits, because there is a likelihood that our bees are actually swarming more than what we realize. All right, moving off swarming. The next one is number 6. Keep colonies smaller. All right, so this one is really interesting too. The biology on this one, this is a tree that fell, and the electric company called me, and I chainsawed these bees out of this tree that was on the ground. They needed it out of the way. And you can see this cavity is about the size of this. This happens to be an 8-frame deep, but this is the size of a cavity that bees prefer. And they literally prefer. If you give them a really significantly bigger then about the size of a deep, 40 liters is actually the size, or a lot smaller, they're going to pick the 40-liter size that's about the size of the deep. They truly prefer this size. And it reduces varroa, increases health. There's health benefits and reasons why they prefer this cavity size, and it keeps their population significantly smaller than our managed colonies. So conventional beekeeping, we are taught to stack supers as high as possible to maximize our honey crop production. And that also creates a booming bee population. And we know, beekeepers, those of us been keeping bees a little while especially, we know that this is a breeding ground for varroa mite reproduction. The more worker production and drone production of bees that we have, the higher the mite production as well, because mites produce, of course, under the cappings of brood. And these colonies with these big booming populations are the ones that are most likely to die in fall or winter. And we will hear, I think you probably hear there in the Portland area, you might hear a beekeeper say, my best, biggest, most productive honey producing colony is the one that died that next winter. And it's usually, not always, but it's usually because of this dynamic of mite reproduction under the cappings. This is a little like this fable y'all might remember, that goose, and she lays these golden eggs. And if she's dead, you never get another golden egg. And that's similar applied to beekeeping. Is if this big booming colony dies, you never get another drop of that golden honey. And the theory, or the thing that I would offer to consider in your way of beekeeping is, ideally we want this colony to produce honey in this year, but also next year and the year after and the year after and the year after. And that's how you make more honey, is because this colony overwinters multiple years in a row and produces honey year after year after year. That's a way to maximize honey in the long run. So my method, I want to say that Dr. Seeley, his research shows, it shows it so strongly that in his The Lives of Bees, he recommends 1 deep, a queen excluder, and 1 medium. That's all the bigger he recommends, because keeping colonies smaller is so important to bee health. And that's how big he recommends. My personal implementation is, that's where I have modified from Dr. Seeley, just like you will modify from anything I'm saying. You'll come up with your own ways, but that's a little too small for me. So what I've tried to do is find a middle ground. So I do 4 boxes max. So this is a deep, and this is actually a shallow, and this is a medium. These 3 boxes are for the bees. I make sure they have plenty for themselves, and this 4th box is for me. This is box number 4 up here. And it doesn't matter too much what these boxes are down here, but these boxes are theirs. This one is mine, this 4th box. And the way I maximize this honey crop is, in early spring, I put box 4 on, the bees fill it, cap it, I pull it off, I harvest it, I put it back on wet. They fill it, they cap it, I pull it off, harvest it, I put it back on wet. They fill it, they cap it. And as many times as they'll do that, I'll be glad to take that honey, while leaving them with plenty down here. And that's how I'm maximizing this honey crop, but not allowing this population to boom, and not stacking many supers on top. That's how I'm doing it. And that works for me. I like doing small batch processing. I'll have multiple colonies that will be ready to harvest at once. So it's not like I'm just doing 1 box. I'll do several of the colonies that are ready at any one time, but several times each year. That's how I'm doing that. All right, number 7, leave more than enough honey for winter. So bees evolved to eat nutritionally superior honey. Nectar, not syrup, contains minerals, vitamins, gluconic acid, formic acid, and microorganisms, stuff that you don't find in syrup. There's research out in 2021 that shows that nectar contains significantly higher antibacterial activity compared to bee processed syrups. There's some new research coming out. I just saw it the other day. I need to update my stuff. In 2023 that showed similarly that that bees that live overwinter on honey have higher survival than bees that try to overwinter on syrup. There is some information out there right now that is counter to this that's being shared. That is not. I don't think it's not based on very sound science. That is indicating the opposite. But this is what bees evolved to eat over their entire evolution is honey for their carbohydrate source, and of course pollen for their protein source. All right, conventional beekeeping. Sometimes we overharvest honey midsummer. We hope for a fall nectar flow that is strong. We may harvest more honey in the fall, and then we may feed them back nutritionally inferior syrup for them to try and survive on. In my area, they need to live on that winter food for 5 months. And it is inferior, that food, if it's not truly nectar-derived honey. So the practice to increase bee health is really leave more than you think your bees are going to need for fall, send them into winter heavy, and then in spring you can harvest winter honey. Assuming you didn't put a mite treatment on in late fall, you can harvest that honey in the spring, which I have done. My personal implementation is I harvest different time than most beekeepers. I harvest after the dearth is over and at the start of the next nectar flow. So I'm trying very hard to always process honey during the next nectar flow. That guarantees my bees are always eating honey during every dearth, including winter. And then I harvest if the total weight of my hives are greater than 180 pounds. This is a hanging game scale. It's a Cabela scale. This thing costs $50, and I hook it under the back of the hive and I just double the weight. This one weighs 156 pounds, so it's not quite ready to harvest honey. It needs a little more weight, but it's definitely winter ready. I send my bees into winter heavy at 140 pounds. And this is a total hive weight. All right, that's number 7. Number 8, feed for survival only. All right, so the bee biology on this one's super cool too. So bees are totally in sync. If we enable them to be, they're completely in sync with the seasons. They collect nectar and pollen in sync with the flowering plants and with whatever their microclimate. And again, if we've got locally adapted bees, I think you can kind of see how this stuff starts to all hang together. But they grow their population and they decline their population in sync with the seasons. Conventional beekeeping, sometimes in spring, we are taught to simulate a false nectar flow. It's really what we're doing by feeding, once again, nutritionally inferior sugar, syrup, or pollen substitute in the spring to get the bees to start brooding up early. Again, to get that huge population, kind of goes against that other one we just talked about not creating these crazy high populations. And they're out of sync with the environment. And then sometimes, especially if you're reversing boxes, the bees can't hold that brood at 95 degrees during those cold snaps in spring when we've artificially caused them to brood up out of sync with the environment. So the practice to increase bee health is to feed for survival. And I am not saying don't feed your bees. I'm saying definitely feed your bees for survival. So in spring, especially if you're a new beekeeper and you're putting your bees on undrawn foundation, right? They have to, we know the results are that it takes about 6 to 8 pounds, give or take, of syrup or nectar, honey, to create 1 pound of wax. It's hugely resource intensive. So if you're a new beekeeper, or you put your bees on undrawn foundation, absolutely feed them syrup. They're in a race against time to draw that comb out, get it all filled, raise all those bees so they can survive their first winter. So absolutely help them out. That is a race for survival. Fall, if they're underweight, absolutely feed them 2-to-1. Don't let them starve going into winter. Winter, if you're worried, throw a sugar patty on. Spring, if they're going to die because they don't have enough food, absolutely feed them 1-to-1. And anytime they're sick, feed them syrup and pollen subs so that especially if they appear to not be foraging well, feed them so that they are getting therapeutic support. So feed for survival, but not because you took too much honey and not because you over harvested honey. So my personal implementation of this, my idea is I feed internally only. I don't external feed. I don't open feed. I don't entrance feed. I feed internal so I don't set up robbing ever. Or I try not to. I actually have when I've done silly things, but I try not to. I feed when they're drawing comb. I stop feeding when they've got 2 boxes full. And I try really hard never to feed again, except, when there's extenuating circumstances. All right, we'll do number 9, and then I'll stop before we do number 10, and we'll take some questions. All right, so insulate hives. And I think this applies for your area of the world. It probably does. So, and here's why. The bee biology on this is bees evolved to live in thick, ideally 5 to 14 inch, huge, thick tree cavities, which has this R value, which is a measurement of heat transfer, basically, or heat change. The higher the value, the better. So the R value of a tree cavity, which also has water in it, so it has a higher thermal mass. But the R value is 6 to 30 in a bee tree. It has infinite insulation above and below the cavity. And bees, this is Derek Mitchell's work, 2016 and 2023. He is learning that bees in a bee tree rarely cluster. They don't cluster the way we thought they did in a bee tree, and they move easily to honey. Conventional beekeeping in our 3/4 inch, most of our hives are Langstroth hives, 3/4 inch hives. They must cluster to survive winter. The R value is not even 1. It's 0.84. It's almost like they have no insulation. This has almost no insulating qualities. And as I mentioned, it was actually 2014. Compulsory, frequent, life-saving behavior clustering is in a thin-walled hive. They have to cluster just to not die. And they do die inches from honey, and they die when moisture drips down on them. The practice to increase bee health is to insulate and maybe manage moisture. And I say maybe because the condensing colony concept, that's Bill Hesbeck, is indicating that bees need far more moisture in the winter for homeostasis. That's basically just maintaining the water level properly in their body, and also for brood rearing. My personal implementation, as I implement all my colonies, costs about $15. It's cheap compared to a colony that dies. And also, it's cheap relative to them coming out of winter, not cold stressed and ready to work to make honey for themselves and me. I add it when my nighttime temperatures start dropping regularly to 40 degrees, which is around October 15th for me. And I don't remove it until the nighttime temperatures are not dropping around 40 degrees regularly. And that's around April 1st for me. But this varies. Last year, I didn't pull my insulation off until about April 15th. It was just super cold spring. And then this is exactly what I do. And it's a lot. And I don't pretend it's not. And to do this on 20 to 25 colonies is a lot of work. But this insulation, and I can tell from the broodminder how it helps, those temperature sensors. But for 7 months, my bees are benefiting from this, from October through April. And I'll just let you look at this. But there is one thing I want to point out is there is zero, literally zero upper ventilation up here. And this right here, you can see, that's the only ventilation they get. And that is as close to a bee tree as I can get them. And that's about the size of the opening of a bee tree. And then there's all this other stuff on here. All right, let me stop and see if there are any questions. Otherwise, we'll get to number 10.
Okay, I've got 3 questions here. Heather, Bergstrom asks, what's the purpose of the brood minder if you are not manipulating brood nest? And I've got
Yes.
2 more questions. I'll let you hit that one first. And
All right. So I'm not that tip is don't overly disrupt the brood nest. I am absolutely doing inspections, looking for diseases, and I'm doing inspections. I'm not overly disrupting. So I'm not reversing boxes. I'm not if the bees are drawing wax, for example, on the right side of the box, I let them gradually work their way over when they're ready to the left side. I'm not moving frames around. I don't checkerboard. I don't do any of that stuff. So I am absolutely disrupting the brood nest on occasion when I'm doing inspections, but I put everything back the way the bees had it. I don't manipulate it and change it on them pretty much ever that I can think of. Well, that's not true. I do when I need. I do. I'm starting to pull out old, really dark brood comb. So then I'm having to manipulate it that way. I've got to get some of that comb out of there. I've got colonies that are 7 years old, 6 and 7 years old, and they've been using the same brood comb all that time, and I've got to start swapping it out for them. So I'm doing manipulations like that. But I'm very conscious and very I don't know, sensitive to when I'm changing things on them and trying to do it as little as possible.
Jessica Anderson has a question. With your 4-box setup, do they treat or use the smaller brood boxes differently than if a beekeeper used 2 deeps as the brood boxes and 1 honey super?
It's a great question, and the answer in general is, and Dr. Seeley would confer to a large degree, is the bees don't care. Box size, if I'm using a deep and 2 mediums and some other beekeeper is using a double deep, 2 deeps, a double deep, it's about the same amount of size. A deep and 2 mediums is a little bigger than two deeps, right? But the bees don't care. Space is space to the bees. That's and we argue that. I don't know why we do, but we do. Beekeepers all argue that stuff all day long, and it's really beekeeper preference. The reason I run a deep and 2 mediums, and I actually moved. I was a hodgepodge of 10 frame, 8 frame equipment. It was just this kind of big mess, and I couldn't interchange it. And recently, I got a chance. A gentleman, a friend of mine, he decided to get out of beekeeping, and so he was getting rid of a bunch of 8 frame equipment. So I bought all his 8 frame equipment, and then I cut down a bunch of my 10 frame equipment to 8 frame stuff. Anyway, so the long story short is now I'm all 8 frame. So I've got consistently a deep and 2 mediums, and it's 8 frame. Happens to work for me. I'm not very big, and I was having a hard time lifting certainly double deep 10 frame equipment. Anyway, my point was the bees don't care. I mean, they don't care what size box we put them in. And so it's beekeeper preference. So if you're more comfortable with double deeps, then go with double deeps. If you don't want to lift that second deep, then maybe a deep and a medium. If I were queen of the world, which I'm not, but if I was, I probably would be all mediums. I just think just the ease of interchangeability would really be nice. But the bees don't care. They don't care. It's all space to them. It's just space.
Okay, I'll leave the rest of the questions till the end, I think.
All right. Okay, number 10, practice integrated pest management. You probably could have guessed this was going to be number 10. All right. The bee biology on this is these wild bees, the ones that survive better than managed colonies, per the very beginning of the presentation. They have the same disease pressures, yet they have higher immunity and higher survival, right? So the question we hear all the time, has anybody heard this phrase? No one is treating those wild bees, so why should we treat our managed bees? And let me just stop. I can't see you all there, But if you've heard that phrase, has anybody heard that? No one is treating those wild bees, so why should we treat our managed bees? If you've heard that, now maybe you might ask yourself this question. What else is no one doing to those wild bees? And oftentimes when I'm in the room with folks, people start yelling out the answers. But since we're not together, and I wish I was with you, but what else is no one doing to those wild bees? No one's shipping them to locations where they're not suited, where they're not locally adapted to live. No one is putting them in boxes right smack next to each other and painting them the same color so they drift and share diseases amongst each other. No one is scraping off their propolis and throwing it on the ground and expecting them to just go get it again and again and reducing their immunity and making it harder for them to thermoregulate their house because now it's not winterized as well because we scrape this stuff off. No one is disrupting the brood nest overly so and making it harder for them to keep their brood warm and thermoregulate. No one is feeding them inferior syrup in the spring to simulate a false nectar flow so they brood up out of sync with nature. No one is scraping off swarm cells and disrupting the brood nest repeatedly to try to keep them from swarming and preventing that health nurturing swarming event that is good for them. No one is taking their honey. No one is feeding them back syrup in the fall and expecting them to live on that for 5 months when they have to be winter bees and be long-lived. No one is putting them in 3/4-inch thin-walled hives and expecting them to shiver literally for 5 months so they can simply survive to meet the next spring. These are the things that I mentioned earlier that I know I have an impact on my bees and that I try to minimize because I know this makes this harder for them to survive and contributes to those colony losses that we talked about at the beginning. No one's doing any of this stuff to those wild bees, and that's part of the reason why they have higher survival and higher immunity than our managed bees. So, conventional beekeeping from an integrated pest management perspective, conventional beekeeping, sometimes we treat prophylactically, which means treating on a schedule, which means sometimes we're treating our colonies when they don't need it, or we're missing treatment of a colony when they did need it. And then I just offer these topics here before attempting treatment-free beekeeping. Please study, or I would recommend studying these topics here. And there's a whole section, it's part 3 of my book, where I review all the science around why treatment-free is difficult from an environmental and a biology perspective. It doesn't have as much to do with willpower or commitment as it does basically bee biology and science. But before you attempt treatment-free, I would just recommend studying these topics here. So the practice to increase bee health and productivity is to practice as much integrated pest management as you can. Become an expert on Varroa biology. Study the Honeybee Health Coalition tools for Varroa management. I understand, again, it was Dewey that mentioned that there's a new version coming out pretty soon. And I want to mention how integrated pest management works. Each of these is an arrow to deal with Varroa destructor, Varroa mites. And the idea is if this action right here, let's say it reduces Varroa by 10%, and maybe this one reduces Varroa by 10%, and this one reduces Varroa by 10%. And these are all just different actions that we do. If you did 3 of them and you reduced each by 10%, that's 30% lower mites in your colonies, which means you can treat a lot less and a lot less frequently and do less collateral damage to your bees upon doing the treatment. So my personal implementation of this is I practice this thing called treatment-less beekeeping. I am not a treatment-free beekeeper. I'm a treatment-less beekeeper. And what that means is I heavily use integrated pest management. And these 9 tips above if you start looking at them, 4 directly reduce varroa, like literally reduce varroa loads, and then the others increase the immunity and increase the health of the bees so they can combat the viruses and that varroa vector. But that's a lot of why the survival that I have, it has to do with the way these things work together. I do use all screened bottom boards, and I keep the insert in all the time, but I always have those mites dropping through that bottom board. And that's kind of what I told you earlier, is people will say all the time, well, those screened bottom boards, only about 10% of the mites drop through. And that's absolutely true. But I want those 10% of mites gone, because I'm going to do a bunch of other stuff that's going to reduce it. And before you know it, I can treat a lot less, hence the word treatment less. I mentioned earlier, I let my bees rear their queens from my colonies that handle mites best. That's how I do my queen replacement. I don't buy queens. And then I never take my eye off mites. And I mean never. I run regular alcohol washes, probably more than most beekeepers. But then I do 24-hour natural drops on a sticky board 12 times a year at the beginning of the month on every single colony with discipline. And then I rotate these 3 organics. And I only use the organics. I don't use the synthetics. So I use Apiguard, Formic Pro, and OAV, oxalic acid vaporization. And I follow the label. The label is the law. And I use them when you're supposed to. And very, very carefully. And only when that individual colony needs treatment do I put a treatment in. But I am not a treatment-free beekeeper. I'm a treatment-less beekeeper. All right. Let me stop there. Actually, I'll just finish. All right. So back on this slide. So we talked about all these stressors, remember? And here's my face, and there I am. I'm still, like the question the person asked earlier, I am still doing inspections, disrupting that brood nest. I'm still taking honey. You saw that. I'm still putting them in the best insulated hive I can, but it's not near as good as what they can get in a bee tree and do for themselves without my so-called help. So I am still stressing my bees. I'm just trying to do it as little as possible, but I still recognize here I am doing the best I can. But I am managing my bees and proactively and actively. And I want to leave you with a quote by Dr. Robin Underwood. She's out of Penn State. She wrote this in a research paper. This is in a research paper. She wrote this quote: despite the many stressors impacting honeybees, beekeeping management is the most important factor associated with colony health and productivity. Our choices as beekeepers matter more than anything else, as it relates to the health and productivity of the colonies within our care. All right, so here are my 10 tips for healthy, productive bees. There they are. I want to say again, I am in no way suggesting my way is the one right way to keep bees. You may take these and make them better and make them more for you. You would probably replace some with your own ideas. I hope the concepts that I offered you, the idea of looking at how bees survive, what increases their immunity, what reduces stress, will inspire you to come up with your own 10 tips, perhaps. And then this is the summary. Wild colonies have higher survival. We can adopt some practices that model wild bees. And increased bee health equals increased survival, which means increased honey, because dead bees don't make honey. And I just usually end with, I ask for a show of hands. Did you find just one idea to apply to your beekeeping? And I can't see you all, but I certainly hope that there was something of value in this for you. And then I do have, and sometimes people like to take a picture. Here are some of the studies, the academic studies to support what I've shared here. There's like 156 peer-reviewed sources in the back of my book. But all of it is there's at least a basis of science in all of these ideas. So I'll put this up and then I'll take a question and then I can put up the next slide, et cetera, et cetera.
Great. I still have a couple questions here. Theresa, San K says, do you make or buy the sugar patties? And Aaron says, our winter nighttime temps are between 35 and 50. It rarely drops below freezing and it usually rains. How would you handle insulation with the wet environment we live in?
Okay, let's start with the sugar patties. Let's see. I don't have a slide of that. I do make my own. And it's a no cook recipe, and I can send it to Brian, and he can share it with you. And it just has it doesn't have much. It's got granulated sugar, 2-to-1 syrup, and a dash of Honeybee Healthy, and that's it. And it's a no cook, and just needs to sit in these pans overnight, and that's what I use. But there's lots of different recipes, but I'm happy to share mine with you. And then the other question, 35 to 50 degrees at night is all the colder it gets there. How would you, and it's very wet. How would you handle insulation? So what I would suggest for that, let me offer it this way, and then you see what you think. Bees in Oregon are living in well-insulated bee trees as their preferred choice, their preferred home. I mean, they obviously will live in other things. Insulation is just a way that they don't have to expend energy to heat and cool their home. And polystyrene hives are, and I don't like the idea of plastic. I know a lot of people don't, but the insulating qualities of polystyrene, one of the advantages of a polystyrene hive is it works year around. So I would think, based on my understanding, is it would still work for you, even though it's wet and humid. And here's how come I think this as well. One of my locations is at the bottom of a very pretty big hill, a mountain really, where I have some bees. And this cold, moist air comes rushing down that mountain every single night and soaks absolutely everything. And there's mold problems. That's the biggest problem in this area, is just mold on everything. And the insulation helps the bees keep the humidity and the temperature regulated inside the colony despite all that. So I would research it, but I don't think these concepts don't apply to you. I think they do. If in fact, maybe even more. All right, I'll move to the next slide.
Oh, go ahead.
Go ahead, Brian.
One more question. What has the broodminder information allowed you to change in your beekeeping?
Yes. So the second part of my book is all about broodminder. I almost called it the 11th tip. And I'm writing. If any of y'all get Bee Culture magazine, I have a 4-part series. I'm writing for them these days, and I'm real excited about that. I'm real honored. But I have 4 articles coming out over the next 4 months. The first one, the first one came out in February, and then starting in April, May, June, and July, there'll be 4 articles about broodminder. So you can read about that there if you'd like. But for example, the sensor tells you when your colony is queenless, because the bees thermoregulate the brood nest when they're raising brood. They'll stop thermoregulating the brood nest once there is very little brood left, and you can tell that that it went queenless. And the 7 times that I've had a queenless colony, I'm kind of embarrassed to admit it, but y'all probably figured out I'm not a perfect beekeeper yet. I already told you that. But I think at least 6 of the 7 times my colonies have been queenless, I was first made aware that there was some problem going on because the sensor told me so. It gave me a tip. Something's wrong in here. You need to go do an inspection. Stop all the stuff you're doing. Make it a priority to get in, Bailey hive or whatever would be the hive that had the problem. So that's one thing is it gives you an indication that your colony is possibly queenless. Another one is it tells you when your colony has swarmed. Um, and I won't go into all the details about that, but well, maybe I will. There's a little 4-degree spike in temperature that occurs just as the swarm, just before it departs, before it exits and it's cast from the colony. And the researchers think that it's due to all the departing bees warming up their flight muscles all at the same time. 2/3 to half to 1/3 of the population all at the same time. It causes a spike in temperature, and you can literally see it on the broodminder graph. Another one is Varroa treatments. You can literally watch the bees struggle when you put Formic Pro, Apigard, or even OAV, oxalic acid vaporization. And you're so very aware of the disturbance, the biological disturbance, that it makes you way more careful when you're putting that stuff in your hives, that you're doing it when you're supposed to, like when the temperatures are, cool for the next 3 days, especially if you're using Formic. So your awareness is so much greater. The sensor will tell you if your colony's been disturbed by, say, a skunk. At night, you can see when the bees roar up. When they go out to defend against an intruder. You can see that on the sensor, and you know that your colony is being bothered by something, and you can take action, put chicken wire around it or whatever. There's lots of stuff. Those are just some examples. I like I said, there's a whole section in the book all about it because I'm so I'm very dependent on these sensors. And it's not an excuse to not inspect. It's just additional, very valuable information that helps you be aware that there might be a problem so you can fix it before it gets full blown, is how I would say it. Next slide. This is the last resource slide. Are there any more questions?
That's it for the moment. Laura has a short overview of what happened in January, and maybe I can collect some more if there are any at the end of her short presentation. But thank you very much.
Very good. All right. So should I stay on and then go ahead, Laura? Laura's going to go next.
Yeah, and she's got,
Great.
yeah, you want to see what's been up?
Yes, please.
Unmute myself. So this is just first slide again. If you're not already a member of Pub, memberships are just $25 a year. And with that, you get access to the swarm list. There's a Bee Buddy mentor program, which is really great. We have the bee days at the apiary. We have a library full of books and candle molds, all sorts of stuff. DVDs, if you still have a way to play that. And thinking about books, we will have Theresa's book available at our next meeting next month. And I have the date on a different slide. So if you're interested in purchasing that book, I was reminded that we will have some copies. And then we also have equipment rental through Pub. So it's a great membership if you're not already a member. All right. So January, what some of us have been up to over at the apiary, it's in St. John's. It's really beautiful along the river if you haven't been there.
Can't
But
see your Can't see your screen, Laura.
Oh, no, you can't see it?
I see the first slide.
Did it not click over? Huh. Let me try sharing again. Does it work now?
Yes. Yes.
Great. Okay. So Jana, Gil, and Stefan did oxalic acid vapor treatments on all of the pub hives and the green anchor hives. And Jana just has a little plug in for the queen rearing class. We're hoping to have one. So stay tuned for more information. Out at the Blanchard Farm hives, Katie Fackler and friends, they visited the farm. They did the oxalic acid treatments. And the final one was completed on a clear, cold, and beautiful day. And I believe we have some pictures. It's really quite beautiful out there. And that was done on Monday by Brian after work one day. And then in terms of just education, we have our gather and blather meetups. Those are usually on a Saturday on the weekend. The last one was a success. Some of the topics discussed were latest mite treatments. They also played the board game Apiary. And I guess they just opened it and expected it for future playthrough. I was unfortunately not there, but I hear it's a good time. And then Brian Freckler gave a community presentation on bees to approximately 80 to 100 residents at the Touchmark Fairway Village, which is a retirement facility in Vancouver. It sounds like it was really a huge success, and so many of the residents were interested in learning more about bees and beekeeping, which is really cool. So here are some of the pictures from the Blanchet farm. It is really pretty. Looks like there are 3 hives out there that the residents help tend.
I'm not seeing the picture.
Oh gosh, why isn't it? I don't know. Maybe do you want to?
I think you're sharing just the program and not the full screen. So you can either scroll down on what you currently have or
There you go. That was
Oh,
it.
did that work that time?
for a second.
Okay. This is why a preschool teacher is not the best option for
There you go.
for sharing on Zoom. Okay, here we go. Third time is the charm. And Brian, I mean, I've never been out to Blanchet Farms. Is there anything you want to share just kind of about the location?
This is right in the middle of wine country on Finn Hill Road in Carlton. This is the new $9 million expansion where they've got accessible housing for 20 guys in recovery. And it's just a beautiful spot. Can't be a better place for beekeeping. Just marvelous. And in the spring, of course, we'd love to have any of you out, and we'll put you to work. So we're getting the residents, this is part of their chores. So feeding the pigs, feeding the goats, and beekeeping.
Nice, thanks.
Nice.
All right, and this is from the Gather and Blather. That looks like the apiary game.
Yeah, this is Paladins League, and it's a game and pub coffee shop. It's just a great location.
Nice. All right, so upcoming events. This Saturday, there is Bee School. I have some more info coming up on that. Our next meetings, March 5th, we have Mandy Shaw talking about Varroa biology and management. If you haven't met Mandy or seen her, she gives really great interactive presentations. So that should be a great night. And that will be hopefully in person again. April 2nd, we have Judy Scher coming on spring management, and then Dewey will also be coming to talk about the Pacific Northwest Honeybee Survey. Bee School this Saturday. It's designed for the beginner beekeeper. I know that I took the Bee School class when I was starting, and Susie is great. She is so helpful, and it's a really informative course. It's a 6 hours on this Saturday, February 8th at the Tabor Space, which is in Southeast. It's $110, but you get a year of pub membership and you get the honeybee biology beekeeping book that Dewey helped author. He co-wrote it, and it's an awesome, just really informative book. I know I refer to mine sometimes. Still just kind of open it up and see what it says when I'm curious. And if you are interested in signing up, you can do so on the pub website under events. The Learning Apiary, another wonderful pub program. It's starting back up in March. It's a hands-on experience with bees. Again, it's in the St. John's neighborhood of Portland at a place called Green Acres. It's right on the river. It's quite beautiful. And we will be meeting the first and third Sundays from 11 to 1 o'clock. New beekeepers are welcome. Experienced beekeepers are welcome. If you don't have a beekeeping suit, we have suits there at the apiary for you to borrow. So it's a great opportunity if you're just kind of curious. If you want to get on the email list, Jana sends out emails, and you can email her at apiary@portlandurbanbeekeepers.org. And that way, just in case, sometimes, you know, in March, our weather's a little off and maybe it's too cold to meet. So sometimes we cancel or the time changes just a little bit. So definitely get on that email list. And the address, again, is on the slide. There's plenty of parking. It's a short little walk to get in. And we meet in the pollinator garden. Jana always puts out a sign. You'll see kind of people streaming in from the parking lot up this little path into Green Acres. So kind of just follow people if you go. I often head to the apiary, and it's just a ton of fun. You get to talk bees, and I've learned so much just being there. And then we have a volunteer opportunity coming up. We need 1 to 2 volunteers to staff a pub table at the Arletta Elementary STEM event. Kids really do love bees. I can second that as a teacher. I know all my students are really interested in them. And so our goal of the table is just to help students understand a little bit more about bees, the life cycle about bees, and what beekeepers do. Susie has items for the table for you to share, some beekeeping equipment, as well as some large pictures so the students can see bees up close and kind of look at all their body parts and just see how cool they are. And this volunteer position takes place on Friday, April 18th from 2:30 to 4:30. It's at Arletta Elementary School, which is near Southeast 66th and Foster. If you're interested, reach out to the education at Portland Urban Beekeepers. And that would be Susie that you're reaching out to. All right, and that brings us to the end. So if anybody has any questions, you know, anything, go for it.
That's it from the question board. Theresa, again, thank you for your time and your presentation, and we look forward to reading your book.
Thank you, everyone, for having me. I enjoyed it. And feel free to email me. It's teresa@littlewolf.farm. I'm happy to talk bees with anyone and everyone. So I appreciate it. Thank you so much for having me.
Fantastic. All right, everybody. Stay safe tomorrow morning.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye. Good night. Thank you, Teresa.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye, thank you.